Right, okay. Thank you so much for coming. This is a study that is, it's becoming quite extensive and quite adventurous as I move along. So I'll just let you into my world of the transhumans. Just to begin with, there's a lot of ongoing discourse, a lot of growing narratives about the human condition and the human and where we are going or what is happening to us. And there's a lot of anxiety, especially because we're so entangled in a vibrant technoculture. And I decided to use the transhuman movement as a magnifying glass, sort of, to just look at the anxiety that surrounds us on our human condition and on the predicted futures of humanity. So transhumanism basically propagates or campaigns for a radical life extension and eliminating of the aging process through technologies, high technologies. And I'll just go ahead and describe that for you. So the transhumanism basically is a cultural movement that affirms the possibility and desirability to fundamentally improve the human condition, especially by making and developing widely available technologies to eliminate aging and greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. So basically, the transhumans believe that we are coming into a point where we will literally have to merge with machines. So it's not anything that we're reading about anymore. They're actually believing that we're coming to a point of singularity, is what they call it, where we will have to shun our humanity and basically latch onto technology in order to progress into a post-human future or into a post-human civilization, because they believe that humanity has come to an end of its evolution or has evolved beyond itself. But technology, on the other hand, continues to rapidly and exponentially grow, and it's basically either overtaking us or we have to piggyback on its on its capacities to see a post-human future. So I'll just play this little clip momentarily just so you can understand what the singularity means.
Singular point in the development of history where there is a singular point in the development of history where computers catch up to be as intelligent as people are. And since the rate of progress of electronics is faster than the rate of progress of biological systems, there's a point when computers match people at which things are irreversibly altered, at which computers then keep on improving faster and people potentially stay with our own cognitive architecture and we don't get to really improve nearly as fast.
The singularity is...
Yeah, so basically that's the bottom line, that we are coming to a singularity. And I just asked myself where their strong convictions were coming from, why they were so convinced that this is the way in which we are progressing as a species. So I came across Kevin Kelly in his TED talks, What Does Technology Want? And what really pulled me into his analysis of technology was the fact that he cited an ambivalence that was very familiar to me and to most people that I know towards technology, with its ever-present nature. So we're just wondering, it's so there, what do we do? Do we reject it, or do we just surrender and go like, oh well? But I think upon further investigation, Kevin Kelly found out that technology was imitating evolution in this five very pertinent ways, and its evolution as conceptualized by Richard Dawkins. So technology is ubiquitous, it's complex, it specializes, it's diverse, and it socializes. And for me, the best, or rather the platform that I looked for to exhibit all of these features, I found it in social networking sites and the gadgets that we use therefore to do social networking. This was a very extensive part of my study, as you can imagine, which is where the title Perfectly Transparent came from. because Sherry Turkle in her book Alone Together says that modern technology is now a phantom limb, and that it proposes itself as the architect of our intimacies. And so when we look at how we relate to, let's say, our laptops or whatever gadgets that we use to interconnect or to reach out to each other, there is a sort of an offline, or there was an offline online self. You know, when we go online, we have this persona that we remodel, we mold, we embellish, we improve and enhance. But technology is so powerful that there is no distinction between online and offline. Now this is just a very blurry area, and what we do is oscillate between online and offline. So what we do online impacts how we look at ourselves offline, and we begin to change accordingly, and vice versa. And when it comes to things like laptops or whatever gadgets that we use for social networking, we look to them for comfort. We look to them for company when we're alone. We look to them to be entertained when, you know, when we're bored. And they've sort of become closer to us than our family members. They've also become gatekeepers, so that as much as we are reaching out to people on our online, quote unquote, I'll just use that right now, but online selves, we're reaching out in a way that is carefully crafted in an acceptable style on the online realm. So basically, we're reaching out as we continually look to each other to see what kind of improvements we are all making, and then continually embellish and improve ourselves, you know, depending on what society or, you know, or what we feel is, you know, or what we feel we want to do, you know. So if you're an activist online and you're respected as such, you're going to want to live as an activist offline and to have the same kind of impact on your physical, quote unquote, environment. But the other thing that it has also done is that it has shown us how quickly and how easy it is for our bodies to become disposable. So that we're living in this realm where we're just, you know, there's a fluidity, there's a character of fluidity that comes out with our interactions with our machines. And so this was the best canvas for me to look at the intimacies between man and his invention, because it's very conspicuous. I think it's one of the most conspicuous way we can tell how we relate to our inventions throughout history. And so at the same time, as I mentioned, this are our gatekeepers. So as you know, as we are we're putting our data online, we're carefully making sure to leave out some stuff that we don't like or that we think is flawed, or, you know, and basically machines begin to know us, our insecurities, what we lack, what we fear, and, you know, our secrets better than our neighbors or our sisters and brothers. And so this also begins to show, the translation of an improved persona begins to show physically when we begin to replace parts of our bodies with prosthetics, prosthetic arms, prosthetic behinds, prosthetic thighs, because, you know, we're constantly trying to improve ourselves. So we are under construction. And I think when Sherry Turkle talked about us being under construction, she meant online. But, you know, increasingly we are finding that even offline we are under construction. And so we are transparent to our machines and to our technology. They see us through and through, they see us inside out, they change us inside out, and vice versa. So in talking about the transhuman dream, Richard Seed, who's a physicist, said that we are going to become gods. And it's easy to see why they would say something like that with that kind of background, seeing that we're already starting to see the beginnings of a transhuman in our relation with technology. We're beginning to see a person who's open enough to let technology mold them into something that is better. We actually feel an obligation to be better versions of ourselves. So it's easy to see why they would make such proclamations. And Ray Kurzweil, who's like the father of all that's transhuman and is associated with the singularity concept, said that we're not able to envision fully what we would be as a superior being because we don't even use much of our brains right now. So much of our thoughts are petty and they're circumscribed. And looking out throughout history, there's been proclamations of apocalyptic endings whenever there's an unveiling of a technology. So for example, when the radio came, and especially in America, and people began to think that they can imagine a world outside of themselves. And so when Orson Welles talked about the Martian invasion, people ran around helter-skelter and their world had come to an end because for them it was possible for there to be a Martian invasion. And likewise with television, you know, E.B. White said television will be the test of the modern world. And, you know, he said, by television we shall stand or fall, of this I'm sure. So it's easy to see why Kurzweil says that we can't see the bigger dream, we can't see the bigger picture. We're busy running around trying to hold on to something, but we're not able to see how superior we will be in the future. But this also brought me to a couple of questions, like whose dream is the transhuman dream? And how do they describe human nature? And how does that kind of translate in a wider geopolitical space? And to just structure my study, I used a couple of concepts, but two I will just summarize here. Stuart Hall's discursive approach to identity, I used that to understand the concept of the human. And he sees identification as a construction, a process that is never completed, always in process. It is not determined in the sense that it can be won or lost, sustained or abandoned. And identification is in the end conditional, and it is lodged in contingency. So that helps us sort of wrap our heads around the malleability of the human that begins to surface in our interactions with the internet. But then there's also Moya Lloyd, who talks about the metaphysics of substance, and she indicates that there's something there beneath, before we start to construct all of this social and linguistic languages around what the human should be. There is an internal essence or a presence that's already pre-existing. And so back to my questions, whose dream is this? I came across a survey run by Terasem, who were nonetheless techno enthusiasts, who carried out a survey called Transhumans. Who are they? What do they want to believe and predict? And in translating or in interpreting the findings of the survey, Hank Pelissier said that most transhumans are young, and most primarily their goal is immortality. And I could relate to that. Then he went ahead and said most are also male, white, young, educated, and urban. And so we have Mary Midgley, who comes along and says, well, hang on, well, it's not a global dream to be immortal. She says, in fact, that the idea of achieving immortality by transcending our material bodies was a scientific notion spurred by a patriarchal society. According to her, it's reflective of a pseudoscience that sustains fantasies of self-indulgence and uncontrolled power. But then again, we have people like Donna Haraway who come and sort of inject that, you know, that kind of freedom we want to see in a utopia like the transhuman dream, where we can break from the confines of traditional settings of age, race, class, and gender. And she says that the cyborg is a technopolis in which social relations are turned on their heads, which is freeing to think about, but it also takes us back to before the internet, and these are the kind of hopes and dreams we had for the internet, but it did the exact opposite thing. And so when it came to the definitions of humanity, there seemed to be a general consensus to gloss over issues such as the soul, the God particle, and sovereignty in transhumanism. Things that we think right now define human nature, like reason and consciousness and our memories and our thoughts. And they continue to insist that this consists only a very tiny part of our humanity. But mostly they say that we are exactly what we see. We are DNA strands that can be, whose sequence can be reprogrammed, and the nanotechnology, which is one of the technologies being used in the transhuman dream, and that we are just a composition of our parts. We are the corporeal materiality of flesh and blood and nothing more. And so that can be changed. And Natasha Viterbo agrees. In fact, most people say that this body was not made for the post-industrial era. And so really we're lagging behind, which is why we will not make it to a post-human civilization if we don't change accordingly. And so Michel Foucault alluded to this way before. He did not use the term post-human or transhuman, but he did say that man is an invention of recent date and one perhaps nearing its end. So given this, I try to put all of this within the context in which we are today, a broader geopolitical space, just to see how the dream fits into all of this. And a couple of things jumped out at me, of course, one of which is most important, the digital divide and how this works. Speaking at a World Summit on the Information Society in 2003, Robert Mugabe said that hence, in spite of the present global setting of technological sophistication, we remain a world divided by old dichotomies and old asymmetries that make genuine calls for digital solidarity sound hollow. He says it is a sad, sad story of technological means for unimproved human ends. And this echoes that beneath the rhetoric of a problem-free, perfect, ageless society is really the iniquity of hegemonic and oppressive power relations that currently exist. Technology has proved a very effective tool in the politics of inclusion and exclusion in the world today, and we see this with how investments are spread out or how conglomerates are formed with rich countries, how rich countries kind of group together in these little cliques and find out who has the most economic muscle to actually come up with such technology. And needless to say that they're the ones who are propagating the transhuman dream more than any other parts of the world. And Mugabe continues to say that we seek access to information itself duplicitously presented as a basic human right, while in fact it was commercialized and commoditized by a few rich countries a long time ago. And so inclusion or exclusion is it's not just seen in the digital divide, but also in small things like pre-installed features in the hardware and software that we find in our machines. So, for example, as Amanda and Olanivan pointed out in their book, Globalization and the Digital Divide, they say that the installation of the undersea cable did not include even a single African country. Yet the undersea cable was meant to be used by African countries. And so they say that it is not a matter of lack of accessibility to functional technology. It is a matter of rejecting the other in the process of conceiving the said technology. And so if those being rejected now are not part of the transhuman dream because of their lack of accessibility to technology, are we then proposing a return to eugenics, or as other people would like to euphemize it, dysgenics? Because we know historically that technology has been used in pseudosciences to support prejudiced and biased findings and then conclude them as facts, which are then used falsely as foundations for worldviews nowadays. So is that where we are going? Are we getting rid of the un-people? That's a term used by George Orwell. And the un-people means that the people who are not included in political discussions. But then it also sends that thought in your head, the un-people, that they've already been dehumanized in a way. And so talking about the transhuman dream, back to Richard Seed, he said that if you don't like it, then get off. But if you interfere with me becoming a god, then there's going to be warfare. So there was a kind of arrogance and a disregard for the other when I looked at, you know, at the dream and how it's beautiful, but there's a kind of, well, it doesn't matter who thinks of, you know, age or death as a very important part of their society. I want to become a god, you know, so I'll do it because I have the economic means to do so. And then it also brought up issues of sovereignty, like I've mentioned before, the definition of human nature. We base most of our rights and laws on the sovereignty of the individual. And it's like we seem to say, okay, let's trade that in for a bigger dream, because anyway, the sovereignty is a really big, small part of what we can begin to understand of the superior human being. But as we are trading this off, what are we opening ourselves up to? So the question of surveillance comes in. And I used Jeremy Bentham's panopticon theory. So the panopticon was a model prison in which the guard stood at a central vantage point and was able to see everybody at any one given time, but nobody could see him, which clearly mirrors our society today, what with the Big Brother theories and the cameras everywhere. And the fact, as we had mentioned earlier, that we are watching each other. And so we are watching each other and we are being watched. And this kind of surveillance, this all-seeingness of the panopticon, the system that we live in right now, it induces a state of constant and permanent visibility. And this actually assures an automatic functioning of power, which is disconcerting when we think of the world that we live in that is increasingly becoming two-tiered, where we're being controlled by what Noam Chomsky calls the global plutonomy, who are the very few, very rich. And we, the precariats, are just the ones who are to be shepherded and to be watched and to be told what to do. What is even more disconcerting is that knowledge is connected to power, according to Foucault's discourse analysis. And if knowledge is connected to power, then whose knowledge are we basing all of this on? You know, if we go back into history, for example, just one example, Christendom, if that was the system that had the knowledge back then, and, you know, it was the all-seeing God, and you have to abide by him, and if you don't, you will suffer damnation. We get the same kind of undertones with technology here, where damnation is you will be left to your aging, disease-ridden, you know, body that is vulnerable, well, will become gods. And basically, if knowledge changes with every era that we enter into that is governed by different epistemologies, then what are we saying of a society that is governed by the global plutonomy? Who decides what's normal and what's abnormal? And who decides what's healthy? And what kind of improvements are we talking about? Who decides enhancements to what direction? And so, as you can see clearly, this study has brought out more questions than it has answered, and it has exploded and mushroomed into these tributaries that are then formulating their own pools of information, which I hope to delve into further in a bigger study, probably a PhD program, where I will step back from all of these isms and sort of try and highlight the narrative of the other, that probably sees man's relationship to his inventions differently. Some who value the process of death as a promotion to another place that is not necessarily, quote unquote, a post-human civilization. So that's the kind of thing that I hope to explore in a larger PhD study. So I do welcome your thoughts and suggestions on the way forward.
I think Sally's already post-human because she stayed within the time allocated, which none of us ever do, right? Anyway, Sally, thank you so much. And what we thought we'd do before we go to the second talk by Julie Russo, that we'd take a few questions now and then turn the floor over to Julie and then have some more questions at the end. So are there any questions or comments?
Or comments or feedback or, yes.
So I have a question. I'm interested in President Mugabe's idea about, you know, the divide that it's creating or whatever. Is it So how does the whole movement play into that same theory, the social networking movement that has toppled the hierarchy and the power
Yeah.
in the countries that really don't have all of this technology? It's kind of an interesting flip of the whole thing.
Yeah. There's a, the reason why I started actually to look at this is because I found that some of the people probably in my society were actually living post-human or transhuman, which was weird in a society like ours, where I know that basic needs do not necessarily include, like technology. I mean, basic needs is food. And to find that there are people who actually live in that kind of transhuman, post-human existence was a very stark contrast to just live in. And so that's just one of the things that boggled my mind as well, is how do we fit into all of that as well? I mean, we live in a society where we interact with each other and we build personas online, and we go home to no electricity because the government cannot provide, or has, there's so much corruption, like we go home to these things, and how do we deal with the two worlds, or if there is an existence?
But then we were able to topple that government, in Egypt and Libya, when it's
Yes.
using that technology.
Yes, we were. And to change a lot of things and to bring about a lot of discussions in our society, I don't know. It's
Interesting.
it's interesting. Yeah. Yes.
So there's a lot of talk, of course, about how our natural world is becoming ever more fragile and in danger of collapsing on itself. And we see, when you said no electricity, I immediately, thought of the 10 days I had to live without electricity last year due to this October snowstorm. And I'm just wondering if this notion of becoming post-human is in any way, in the literature that you've read, is it connected to this idea that not only do our bodies have to become more machine-like, does our whole climate and natural world have to become more machine-like?
Yes, according to Rake as well in his transhuman dream, a superior being will automatically change his own environment given the technology that is at his disposal, basically. And so they were talking about using a type of technology to change the water that we drink and make it more healthier and make it more nutritional. And they've talked about changing a whole lot of things, but then there's also people like Michio Kaku who believe that this is a biological world, and when we move to another civilization, it will be more galactic than it is biological. And so there is different schools of thought in regards to where the post-human will live and what their world will look like. But there is a definite consensus that it will be a better world. But the thing is that apparently, according to Michio Kaku, the trick is to move from this civilization to the next. And, that is where the whole issue of war comes in, like a technology this powerful, who's going to own it, and what's going to happen if it's going to catalyze our movement to a post-human world. Yeah.
I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit. You mentioned that in many ways, in I think 1995, when the internet or the World Wide Web happened or emerged, there was this idea that we would overcome difference, or that you could go online and that people would overcome discrimination because you would, in some ways, it wouldn't matter. But of course, we know that's not true.
Yeah.
There's more discrimination, there's more prejudice online than ever, and it's actually promoting hatred, racial injustice,
Absolutely.
gender injustice,
Yeah.
etc. So, could you say a little bit more about, are we learning anything from that? I mean, is this, because you seem on the one hand, I'm not sure if you're critical of this movement, or wondering if we need to give it a chance. I mean, in some ways, we're now giving social media a chance because we're looking at, well, how does it bring about resistance and change? But it's not true about anything. I mean, I'm just sort of wondering where you stand.
I'm not very positive about the transhuman thing. It sounds nice, and I think the reason why I look like I'm on the fence is because I say it's what we were seeing in the beginnings of a transhuman, in the fact that we're very malleable and that we have teenagers who have no secrets from each other now. It's like there is no private sphere in public space anymore. But I don't see how. I think it's based on a very one-sided culture, the transhuman dream and the whole thought of immortality. Because as I mentioned before, there are people who actually see death as a rite of passage and promote it as a rite of passage. It's not something to be feared. And old age is revered and not, it's not a disease that we need to prevent ourselves from. So I'm not very comfortable with the transhuman dream, but mainly because of the whole idea of us becoming a two-tiered society and who owns the technology. And that's my biggest issue with transhumanism, is who owns this technology and who decides who's worth it and who isn't. And it's the same thing with the internet. It's like, the hierarchies existed, but the internet just made them deeper and deeper. And a technology like this is going to make, it's going to be like this side and that side, and it's not going to be a divide anymore. It's going to be like a gap, just really big. There's a lot of loopholes with that dream. Yeah.
Can I just have a really short follow-up comment. I sort of had the same question as Karen, which was the first part of your talk. It seems like a fairly neutral laying out of what transhumanism is, and some of the things that you were saying, I was like, does Sally actually agree with this? So for example, you said at some point machines begin to know us better than we know ourselves, and because I guess when we interact with each other, even if it's online, somehow that data is stored, right?
Yeah.
But I wondered whether you wanted to clarify that. Well, for me, it would be, it's not the machines that know, it's people who have access to the information, and the people who have access to that information are a select group, right? Or, the we that was throughout the beginning of the presentation.
Yeah.
Who is the we? And then in the second half, it seemed like there's going to be a critique, not just along the lines of the digital divide, but along the lines of gender and race and class more explicitly.
Yeah.
So it seemed like you're sort of heading there, but you also, my impression was you're on the fence. It's like a very seductive dream, right? Because it promises so much. I mean, from my sort of positionality, I can completely understand who wouldn't want to be a god kind of thing, but that's only that's only one positionality. So this is more just sort of a meta comment on the sort of line of argumentation through the presentation. You kept me on tenterhooks. I was like, where's she going? Where's she going? I was like, oh.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that I disagree with, but a lot of it is evidential. For example, when we started, I gave the definition of what transhumans believe, and they say using widely available technologies, and I was like, widely available to whom? I mean, that is like, one of the things that brought me to the digital divide immediately. Like, why would they assume? There's a lot of assumption with transhumanism, but then it's also there, like, okay, fine, it's not the machines, but there's no way of erasing yourself completely, from any machine that you log into. There's no way of remaining anonymous online ever. So it's just, but you bring a good point. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so
We'll
much.
have a chance to return.